And thank you once again for coming out on a cold winter day, close to Christmas and during a pandemic. I can't tell you how much your support means to all of us here and each other. Firstly, a bit of housekeeping. Get Concerned Stratford is taking a bit of a pause from launching the rally today, and so we at Wise Communities have taken up the banner, so to speak. Believing it is so necessary to show our support to each other by being here. And of course, to show our elected officials we are as passionately concerned about this project as ever. I want to thank so many of you for reaching out to us with your thoughts and observations, ideas and concerns, and we've tried to run with as many of these things as we could. As many of you already know, it is December 16th when Council will be approaching the cost-sharing agreement, and this is a significant deadline. But before we go any further, I would like to invite Melissa Verspieten from Get Concerned Stratford to bring us up to date on some of their achievements last week and what we can look forward to this coming week.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here again today. I just wanted to give you an update on the past week. It's been a busy one, and we've been attracting attention not only locally, but provincially and within the walls of Queen's Park. On December 1st, Jeff Birch, the official opposition critic for municipal affairs, wrote to the Integrity Commissioner questioning possible non-compliance with the Lobbyist Registration Act. We aren't the only ones that have identified questionable dealings. This is a big deal. We've been heavy into the research over the past week as well. And although we stated last week that Stratford's greenhouse gases would more than double with this factory, some new information regarding production estimates for the factory have been made available. And the new calculations show this factory will in fact quadruple our greenhouse gas emissions. How this factory was ever deemed to be in line with the city's declaration of a climate emergency in February is beyond me. Council has placed the discussion of cost sharing and site plan agreements on the agenda for Wednesday, December the 16th, which means we have 8 days to make our position to Council known and to make them understand why we feel this is such a terrible proposal for the entire city of Stratford. Councillors have been receiving an overwhelming quantity of emails, and although I don't want to discourage anyone from continuing to contact them that way, I would also like to encourage you to pick up the phone and call them, just so that your concerns are definitely being heard. To quote lawyer David Donnelly in a letter sent to Council last Friday, it's our unequivocal opinion that Stratford Council has the complete authority without legal liability to deny Shinyi's proposal for a cost-sharing agreement. Donnelly also states that at the end of the day, whether or not Council should subsidize the Shinyi facility is strictly a political, financial, moral, ethical, planning, environmental, and human rights decision. Funding Shinyi is not a legal decision. In other words, the citizens of Stratford are in charge of this decision, which means Council's hands are in fact not tied. We currently have just over 400 people registered for the community Zoom meeting tomorrow. That will begin at 7 o'clock, and there's still time to register if you haven't done so yet. We have such a diverse, qualified group of professionals to speak to you, and we're excited to hear your thoughts and to see you all there. If you have any questions regarding anything at all, please check the Get Concerned Stratford Facebook page. You can message us there or email us at getconcernedstratford@gmail.com. We also have some of the Get Concerned crew over here with signs and some flyers. So if you'd like to distribute those to your neighborhood or put signs in your yard, please visit them over there. Again, we're super, super excited to see you all tomorrow on the Zoom, and that's all for today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for that, Melissa. And I want to say what a great job you and your team are doing. It's really impressive and very inspiring. At the last moment, I was able to reach out to Anne Colbert from Climate Momentum, as I feel that that voice really needs to be woven into this picture now, because I suspect that's going to be the next battle coming up. So I invite Anne to come and share a few words with us.
Thank you very much. My name is Ann Carbert, and in April, on Earth Day 2019, a friend and I started a climate-focused blog for our local area with success stories, positive stories of movements that are already being made in hopes of encouraging people to talk more about climate change and how we need to change in response to how our planet is heating. And that blog is still there. It's being added to. We have social media as well, so look for climatemomentum.ca, please. This weekend is the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement on Climate. You may know that set a target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. We are on track for 3 or 4 degrees of warming 5 years later. So that's by the end of the century. But what I'm trying to say is we haven't reduced things since the Paris Agreement in 2015. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has made it clear that we need to significantly reduce our carbon emissions by 2030, now just 9 years away, and that would be around 45% of 2010 levels. And we need the planet to be carbon neutral by 2050, which is on the horizon, very close. Many of us, from getting that blog and network of climate-concerned people together, have been advocating for local climate action. Some of you with us, I know. And we want action in line with what the science tells us is required. A climate emergency was declared in Stratford in February because of a citizen petition, and 2 very well-spoken high school students who presented to council that night, they voted unanimously in favor of a climate emergency declaration. The city's follow-up has begun, and part of what we've highlighted in the lead up to this has been some community actions and city actions that will make a contribution to reducing our emissions. But much more needs to be done, and we need to be in the emergency mindset. The Perth County Climate Plan consultation is now open. I hope many of you are aware of that, and some of you have taken part. Because of the pandemic, it's not a series of town hall meetings around the county. It's an online public consultation platform. And this is our public consultation for our local climate plan. It opened November 25th. It closes December 23rd. And as much as we need to rise up when issues like this bite us on the butt, we also need to be thinking of long-term climate planning and climate action and the changes we're willing to make. The online consultation was designed by the Perth County Climate Change Coordinator, Rebecca Garlick. We have a profile of her on our blog website. I hope you are familiar with her. She was hired in 2019 on a 2-year contract to prepare greenhouse gas emissions counts for the county and all the municipalities in the county, and climate plans as well. One large county climate plan with specific recommendations and actions for each municipality in the county, including Stratford. We expect a draft climate plan to come before Stratford City Council early in the new year, and it will be based on the Climate Change Coordinator's work and our public input. So the online survey, that is the public input tool, is a carbon budget tool, and it is interesting to look at because it outlines the amount of local greenhouse gas emissions in the county and each municipality based on 2017 data, and explains the need to reduce these emissions significantly by 2030. And as you go through the survey and make choices about the community changes we could all make to address emissions from transportation, food waste, from our homes and buildings, there's a running calculation that shows you the carbon budget and how much your choices would reduce our community emissions by 2030. The total greenhouse gas emissions, for those of you this means something to, for Perth County is 819,900 tons of CO2 emissions. Stratford's portion, 314,720, which is 30% of the county count. Now, if a massive factory is built or any other industrial development, that local count is going to go up. And if we're producing a draft climate plan to bring before council early in the new year, we need to know what other city plans are happening, and how those are calculated in this carbon budget. Shinny has not disclosed the greenhouse gas emissions from its plan, and that's something you are asking for and we should be asking for. And we should be thinking of it in terms of the 10-year planning that we need to do for significant reductions by 2030. How does this fit with our 10-year community plan to reduce the emissions we're already producing? Right now, the climate change coordinator is working on those emissions counts. She's got emissions count for Stratford broken down by area that's producing emissions. That hasn't been released yet, but it's done. And no one has consulted her about this development and how it might fit into these longer term plans. So we need to turn our mind to this. We need to tell our governments at all levels that we are turning our mind to climate action, to what we can do, to how we can do it quickly and equitably. So I ask a few questions. How many of you have written or phoned council about the Shinny plant? How many of you have written or phoned council about the climate emergency? How many of you have taken the online Perth County Climate Plan survey? Okay, so we need more hands up for the longer term plans that does combine with what you're here today concerned about. There, as you go through the survey, there isn't a whole lot about industry emissions, but there are spots for you to make those comments and give those ideas. And I think doing the whole survey will give you a good perspective of what the challenge we have before us and the solutions that are there if we want to implement them. So you can then go to that comment field and say, I really think industry planning should be part of this climate plan, and we should know the emissions, and that should be part of our community carbon budget. So I encourage you to look for the Perth County Climate Plan Survey. It's an online platform specifically developed for these kinds of consultations. The Perth County Climate Plan Coordinator has put it together with a software company that does these climate consultations across the country. So there's some really great things about it, and where there are gaps, you can type that into the open fields for the comments. You can find it, hopefully, pretty clearly on the city's website. There was an article in the Beacon Herald just on Friday that has the link to it. We have a blog on climatemomentum.ca with some explanation and some quotes from the climate change coordinator. I would love for you to take a look there and to get involved in this larger movement for local climate action. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Anne. And again, for all your tireless work. And I hope that many people will take up the request that you've asked of us, and that includes me as well. As I mentioned last week, with respect to my own remarks, today's remarks will also be found on our website at wisecommunities.com. I'm trying to provide for myself and others a kind of narrative of what's gone on here, so please feel free to go to the website if you are seeking a copy of my remarks. And also say, as a last bit of housekeeping, if at the end of the rally you'd like to linger for a while, we certainly encourage you to do that, obviously in a socially distant way. Really take on the responsibility of that. And in fact, in any time you can in this square, or any public place, bringing attention to the subject, connecting and educating people with the facts, this can only be a good thing. For this is a tale of many questions. So the update on the Parley McKennitt letter and our response back. Last week, you may recall that it became clear that there were now two subjects of concern: the suitability of the proposed glass factory for the city of Stratford, and two, the failure of the democratic process, which should allow citizens their legal and democratic right to a robust examination of this complex and high-stakes project. The absence of such a process, rich in veracity, transparency, and timeliness, has shocked many citizens, and we continue to seek an explanation of how we got here. It comes down to trust. Last week, many of you will also recall that I relayed to you that on November 26th, Mr. Parley, and former solicitor to the City of Stratford, and I furnished the city with a letter of questions for which we were expecting a reply on Thursday, December 3rd of last week. This is the first thing I will briefly report on today. Why brief, you might ask? Well, it lies in the brief response we received after a week to prepare answers. Here's the response from CAO of the City of Stratford, Ms. Joan Thompson, and I quote, "Good afternoon, Lorena McKennett and Paul Parley. Thank you for your letter of November 26, 2020. Our practice has been to review and consolidate the questions submitted by citizens on this project and post the responses on our website so that everyone has access to that information. To remain consistent with that practice, we will add our response to your questions on our website as soon as possible," unquote. So unsatisfactory was this brief response. Mr. Parley and I shot off our own response, which briefly says, "Dear Ms. Thompson, thank you for your letter of December 4th, albeit 21 hours after requested deadline. While you've responded to our letter, you have utterly failed to answer any of our questions or provide a date by which you would do so. Regrettably, this will be pointed out to the interested public on Monday who have been waiting along with us for a reply. We and many citizens will see this as yet another failure of the Mayor and Council to truly protect the legal and democratic interests of its citizens and the principle of democracy. Is this what democracy looks like?" And yet I offer you a postscript. At 9 o'clock this morning, we received the following dispatch from Ms. Thompson, and I quote, "Good morning, Ms. McKennett and Mr. Parley. Thank you for your follow-up email. The city will be posting responses to the questions you and others have submitted to the city on our website later this afternoon," unquote. We wait. Chapter 2, the timeline, the provincial Conservatives, and MZOs. You may recall that last week I focused primarily on the actions of the Mayor and the Council in my remarks, and interestingly, over the course of this week, I found myself experiencing the very thing I was suggesting to the councillors when they would come into more information, that it's okay to let your position evolve as you gather more information. Many call it keeping an open mind. And so my mind has evolved as to who else has been involved in this civic catastrophe. In order to understand this, one must not only follow the money, but follow a timeline which we have been assembling for the past 2 weeks and which is posted on the Wise Cities website. It begins with the then Premier Wynn's trip to China with delegations, including one from Stratford, during which she tweets on November 27th, 2017, quote, "I'm thrilled Xinyi Glass Holdings plans to develop its first North American manufacturing facility, a float glass plant in Ontario. The partnership will create 400 jobs for Ontario workers," unquote. The timeline passes through 2019 when much groundwork of studies is being conducted, including archaeological and air quality reports, noise feasibility reports, and so on. As a citizen not familiar with the preparations of a project of this scale and complexity, it is truly an informative exercise. It also captures the 3 dates from November 2018 to April of 2020, during which the Mayor requests one of these highly controversial and some would say undemocratic instruments called an MZO, a ministerial zoning order, an order the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing can issue, which does not require public consultation and can only be revoked by the Minister as there is no appeal process. An instrument which was rarely used at the time of the Mayor's initial request in 2018, and indeed rare for the previous 20 years, but of which the current provincial government has issued over 35 this year alone. And as of yesterday, this caused the head of the provincial government's Greenbelt Council, Mr. David Crombie, and 6 others to resign. Now, this is the same David Crombie, who was the mayor of the city of Toronto, the same David Crombie who was a former federal cabinet minister, a conservative cabinet minister. Why would this instrument provoke such a dramatic response from such highly seasoned and respected individuals? Simply put, MZOs are designed to bypass public consultation and with little hope of appeal. And the groundwork of this glass factory was facilitated as well by such an authoritarian instrument. But I digress. In this case, it would have been reckless for the mayor to proceed with a project of this nature without the full support of our NPP Randy Pettipies when they first met to discuss it with MP John Nader in the last half of 2018. And yet, the question arises then, why did the minister turn down the mayor's first request and second request for the MZO? Did Mr. Pettipies not have the backing of his minister by this time, after all this work was being done? More bewildering is the question of what changed the minister's mind after the mayor sent his third appeal to the minister in April of this year. Did Mr. Pettipies intervene then? Or did Xin Yi, albeit without a registered lobbyist, as no one has been able to find one? We know the minister said the following in a TV Ontario interview on July 10th of this year, only 2 days after issuing the MZO for Stratford, and I quote, "Well, for now, we're quite happy with the dozen or so MZOs I've done that have been driven by a council decision in a public council meeting before it comes to my desk. That makes sure the public is aware there is a request. It communicates there is a priority of a council, and then it's up to us to decide whether we want to move forward," unquote. Last week, I was focused on what evidence the mayor of Stratford might have given the minister to substantiate public consultation. But I failed to ask the question this way: what evidence did the minister ask of the mayor to substantiate public consultation before he issued his MZO? Or did he just issue it anyway? Perhaps his words of July 10th were but window dressing for the media and public consumption, and that all parties knew they could expedite the process and circumvent the public's involvement by using one of these MZOs. It must also be pointed out that at the time the mayor first asked for it in the fall of 2018, word had not gotten out yet about the efficiency, shall we call it, of the MZOs, as they were rarely given. By 2019, the number of MZOs given went up to 5, and as of today, and this year of 2020, our provincial government has issued up to 35 more in 1 year than in the past 20 years put together. It is being weaponized against the environment in favor of development, as the Toronto Star article of last week put it. And the promotion of these MZOs are now being embedded into an environmental section of the COVID Bill 229, which has passed its second reading and now with no hope to amend. Is this what your democracy looks like, Mr. Pettipies? Wednesday, December 2nd, meeting with the mayor and connecting with the former chief of Chippewas on the Thames. Wednesday found me in the mayor's office for a brief 20-minute exchange of thoughts. It was a good meeting, I'm happy to relay. And I began by saying that for me, this fight is not personal. It is the principle and the values which I am fiercely fighting for, and frankly, would die for. And this is of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Naturally, 20 minutes goes by quite quickly when there is so much to ask and so much to say. But one of the fruits of this visit alerted me to the fact, or confirmed for me, that indeed he nor council were alone in the pursuit of this glass factory in this city. The day of Wednesday last week was rounded out by my first conversation with the former chief of the Chippewas of the Thames First Nations community. I shared with her that there were proposed plans for a glass plant on the perimeter of Stratford, and given her community's long-standing interest in this land, I wondered if they were aware of the proposed project. She indicated that she wasn't, but she was going to raise this with the current chief of Chippewas of the Thames, Ms. Jacqueline French, particularly because of the considerable matter involving the consumption of water associated with this plant. This issue of water was echoed when Mr. Parley forwarded to me his own thoughts, which can also be found on our website. I went to bed, exhausted, but feeling real meaning was being achieved in this process of examination. I think this is what democracy looks like. Thursday, December 3rd, the Xinyi Info Session. On Thursday, as many of us know, Xinyi's representatives, GSP Consultants out of Kitchener, headed by a Mr. Chris Pidgeon, held another info session which went on for nearly 2.5 hours, and which included a question and answer section at the very end. This session covered subjects ranging from basic project information through environmental standards and requirements as set out by the ministry. You can imagine with some dismay, if not horror, when some individuals went to refer to the video of this session and found that the question and answer section had been scrubbed out, and there was no record of those questions and answers. Of course, anyone alive to have witnessed the Tiananmen Square protest will see disturbing echoes of the Chinese government's effort to scrub out that part of their history. This is not what democracy looks like. Which brings me back to Mr. Parley's letter to Council regarding the matter of China, in which I mentioned last week, and I think is worth repeating to some extent. And I quote, "I wish to start out by saying that we ought not conflate the population people of China with the government of China and the Chinese Communist Party and its government policies. What is the connection between the Chinese company Xinyi and the People's Republic of China and government? The Chinese government passed the National Intelligence Act, which requires all Chinese organizations and companies to provide access, cooperation, and support for Beijing's intelligence gathering activities. Moreover, the CCP has a party committee which is involved in the management of China-based and owned corporations with a view to ensuring that the activities of the corporation are consistent with and support the best interests of the nation of China." He goes on his letter to quote, "The Chinese government is engaged in a large-scale systemic oppression of millions of people, in particular Uyghurs, Tibetans, and ethnic Muslim populations. The CCP has punished any opponents to its policies by hostage diplomacy and has jailed for almost 2 years without any trial or hearing Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. The House of Commons recently passed a motion requiring our government to develop a plan to combat China's surveillance and intimidation of Chinese Canadians in Canada and their families in China. And finally, that the Canadian Security Intelligence Service CSIS warns that this Chinese state-sponsored harassment in Canada in part is part of a global campaign of intimidation and harassment, which threatens Canada's sovereignty and the safety of Canadians," unquote. So this is not a matter of racism, but a matter of national sovereignty, and I would urge everyone to read this letter in its entirety. This is not what democracy looks like. Friday, December 4th, David Donnelly's letter on climate change and the environment. On Friday, renowned environmental lawyer David Donnelly sent a very fine letter to City, establishing important points and connecting dots concerning the environment, this glass factory, and climate change, and of course the Climate Change Emergency Declaration, which this city came out with last spring, and which Melissa quoted early on. That's what democracy looks like. Which brings me to last night's conversation with a city councillor who I have a lot of respect for, and who has done some amazing work in this city. I asked her, has there been enough due diligence with respect to the conditions of the workers in this plant, no matter where they come from, to ensure they are safe and secure and not denied the civil liberties most Canadians enjoy in their workplaces? Knowing that the devil is in the detail, could she confirm that she is consumed and that there is currently a level of detail available to ensure that safety standards would be at the highest level along with civil liberties? This is what democracy looks like. So where do we go from here? Well, we continue marching until the job is done. We sing from the mountaintops, from this town square, from this market, wherever we can share this incredible tale to all citizens, many of whom are now only awakening to this exceptionally complex and high-stakes project. As we said last week, we are not anti-industry. We know that a healthy and viable city depends on a spectrum of businesses and industries which provide employment and financial well-being. However, what we are saying, these industries and businesses need to be complementary and aligned with a vision for the future, which is informed by the highest values and standards we know. So I say to everyone here, contact your friends, contact your associates, contact anyone and everyone you know. If they have questions, direct them to our website or Get Concerned website. If they agree with you, ask them to contact the mayor's office. Contact city council, phone them, email them, let them know how you feel. But be respectful, be helpful, and when talking with councillors, applaud them for having the strength and character to allow their opinions to evolve. And most of all, don't let up. Don't stop. Victory is at our fingertips. And this victory is not only for you and I, but most importantly, it is a victory for the citizens of Stratford. And yes, these actions, this movement is indeed what democracy looks like. And in closing, I want to thank everyone again for coming out each week. And if the council hasn't come to their senses on this by next Monday, I think you can safely say we will see you here one more time before that December 16th vote. And I also must acknowledge that I am not only one of many who are fiercely leaning against this wheel, and together we can do this. I want to assure you that this is a battle for many, many important things. The health and well-being of our land, our water, our air, and the legacy we leave our children and our neighbors' children and our grandchildren and our First Nations people. It is a battle for democracy itself, so that it is not allowed to rot from the inside out. And I finish with the mantra I left you with last week. Canadians uphold the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, and defending it begins at home. Thank you. I am reminded one more thing. And this is a wonderful thing about this community. There's so many leaning against the wheel and using their imaginations. And some folks have come up with a wonderful song. They're lyrics to the folk song Blowing in the Wind. And I would invite Eleanor Kane to come up here and join me in leading this. And some of you will have lyrics, and some of you won't, but we'll try to ensure everyone has them all for next week should we sadly be here. So. All right, here we go. Take one. Let me get a key here. How many roads must we still walk down before you will hear our plea? Yes, and how many ways can we stop Shinyi before our land is destroyed? Yes, and how many times will the lies still prevail before you acknowledge the truth? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. For how many years will you poison our skies before our breathing will die? And how many children will you compromise with dangerous chemical sands? Yes, and how many trees will you cut from the land to poison our farms and our air? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many birds and their songs will have died before you will see what you've done? Yes, and how many walks in our land will be safe as the poisonous gases will blow? And how many years will this city remain a city misguided by greed? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Thank you very, very much, everyone. Great job.